Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm very pleased to be with you after COVID. And of course, COVID is one of those things that the world is not going to be the same as it was before it. I can tell you this is true everywhere, not just Australia. It's true New Zealand, Britain, Europe, States, Canada, take your pick, South Africa. There's a lot of South Africans in Perth. Any South Africans here tonight? All right. Well, in any event, it's like September 11th attacks in New York and Washington. It is like the 2008 financial crash. Certain things have happened, and they're happening at a faster and faster pace. And the world, things cannot go back the way they were before any of those things. The world will never be the same as it was before any of those things. And there's more coming. The closer we get to the return of Jesus, the faster world events are going to progress. The faster things are going to happen. We and others, but certainly we, said 25, 30 years ago, there was going to be an explosion of anti-Semitism and Jew hatred all over the world. We said this 25, some of you have known us that long, and you know we said, we're not saying we're the only ones who said it, but we certainly said it. Here it is. I remember warning 25 years ago, 30 years ago in Australia, because I knew the people and I knew what they believed and I knew the moral history, but it couldn't be proven. I warned that Hillsong would end in a scandal. 30 years ago, I said Hillsong was going to end in a terrible scandal. And that was the main so-called evangelical influence in this country. Does that make me a prophet? Certainly not. Things are going to happen at a progressively more rapid pace. Now, one of the things I've been sharing with people is this. Hebrews 10:25, forsake not the fellowshipping together one with another, especially as you see the day approaching. Okay? We're told in Proverbs 18:1, he who remains alone quarrels against all sound wisdom. They seek their own desire. People who will give you an excuse, a manufactured excuse, not to meet with other Christians. They're seeking the will of the flesh, of the old creation, of the old nature. They quarrel against all sound wisdom. Now, I understand there is a legitimate prevailing circumstance in the world today, and in much of the world today, that people cannot find a biblically based church near where they live. I understand that. But the early Christians met in homes. You don't need a church building or a denomination. In fact, very often you're better off without some of those things. Not that there aren't still some good churches individually, and if you have a good church and a good pastor, thank God, you're one of the blessed and fortunate ones. A lot of Christians don't, they're meeting in homes. But with COVID, even in the United States, the marijuana clinics could stay open, and the liquor stores, the bottle shops could stay open. You can get stoned, you can get drunk, but the churches had to close. You want to get stoned, you want to get drunk, no problem. You go to church, they'd lock you up someplace. Literally. And Canada was worse. Canada was worse. And it's going to get worse still. There'll be no political savior. God may use government officials. We need to pray for those in power, but the way it's gone, we know the Lord is coming. We know the way the world is going. And there's a situation where, out of necessity, believers would just go to church online. Some places it was illegal to meet in a home. More than 4 people, 6 people. I'm serious, they were doing that. Okay, so they went on, and there's good Christian stuff and bad Christian stuff online. We know that. But you get used to going to church, getting up late, don't have to drive there, just put the coffee on, have some orange juice and coffee, and push the button, and that was church. And who can fault anybody when that's all you could do? But that is not the case now. Bearing each other's burdens, praying with each other, fellowshipping, taking the Lord's Supper as one body, those things require fellowship. He who remains alone, or she who remains alone, quarrels against all sound wisdom. Remember, the solution to bad church is never no church, it is good church. Forsake not the fellowshipping together one with another, especially as you see the day approaching. You don't need to be saved a long time, and you don't need to be highly intelligent to see the day approaching. We know what Jesus said was going to happen, and it's happening. He's coming. Now, something I always mention when appropriate, and I think maybe it is apropos to say it tonight. Any one of us could have been born at any time in history. And any one of us could have been born again at any time in history had God so chosen that. We could have been born and born again 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago if God wanted to do it. He has placed us here at this time in history for a reason. There have been several times in history where true Bible-believing Christians thought it was the last days. And they had plausible reasons to think that. What makes this time different than the other times? There's one thing that's different. Matthew 23:39, Luke 12:21, Zechariah 12:1-10. The Jews were not back in their land, and they were not back in Jerusalem. They must be back there for him to return. And for the first time since the 2nd century, the first time since the 2nd century, AD, BCE, Jews are turning to Christ again in significant numbers. Not huge, but huge compared to what it's been. Now, there are always Jews who believed. Always. At one time, the most powerful man in the world was the Prime Minister of Great Britain when Britain was the superpower, the British Empire. Back when the sun never set on the British Empire. I guess some of you are Palms. You got any Palmies here? Oh. We got rid of them. Oh, you filtered them out tonight? Good. There was a time when the sun never set on the British Empire. There was a time when Britannia ruled the waves. Britain was top of the heap. The most powerful man in the world was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. And Britain reached the apex of its apex when it got the Suez Canal and a lot of other things under a Jewish Christian, Benjamin Disraeli, who kept Britain out of the American Civil War because he was against slavery. Even though there were industrial and economic interests who wanted Britain to enter the war on the side of the Confederacy because they had interest in the cotton and tobacco industries and things, he was against it. He was the most powerful man in the world, and he understood the strategic importance of the Middle East. This was Disraeli. He was a Jew who was a Christian. The two greatest, most renowned Jewish classical music composers, both Jewish, Felix Mendelssohn and Mahler, both of them were Jews who believed that Jesus was the Messiah. They were saved Christians. Okay. The most important Jewish lawyer in the history of the United States is the founder of Harvard Law School, among his other achievements, Simon Greenleaf. He was a Jew who set out based on the evidence, based on looking at it from a legal perspective, the rules of evidence. And he wrote a textbook on the rules of evidence, still in use today in law schools in many countries. He wanted to disprove the messiahship of Jesus from a legal perspective, from an evidential approach to the subject. And he wound up being convinced that Jesus was the Messiah simply based on the evidence as a lawyer. There are many people like this. One of the probably top 3 or 4 astronomers and astrophysicists in the world is a South African, Daniel Block. Dr. Daniel Block. This is one of the top, everybody recognizes, NASA, he's a consultant there. He's one of the top astronomers and astrophysicists. He'll tell you Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. No question. There's always been Jews who believed, but not like now. Not like now. And it is the children and grandchildren of Jews who went through the Holocaust who were turning to him, bearing in mind the Nazis murdered Jews in the name of Christianity. This has to be the hand of God. And it involves all kinds of Jews. It involves lawyers, physicians, it involves scientists, professors, economists, even rabbis. And it's only the beginning. This has never happened before. This time is different than the other times in history when Christians thought it was the close of the age. So, we could have been born at a different time. Now, speaking for myself, if I was going to pick somebody to be among those people who would be placed on planet Earth at this time to play a role in preparing the way for the return of Christ, I would be able to come up with a far more worthy candidate than that pathetic excuse for a Christian I saw this morning when I was shaving in the mirror. And looking around, well, don't take it personally. Nonetheless, by the sovereign grace of God, here we are. Any one of us could have been born 500 years ago. Any one of us could have been born again 500 years ago. But he's placed us here now. The only logic I can see in it is God chooses the foolish things that confound the wise of the world. If God wanted to choose a great nation through whom he would give his word and send the Messiah, if he wanted to get intellectuals and smart people, he would have chosen the Greeks. If he wanted to choose a powerful people, he would have chosen the Romans. Or he would have chosen the Assyrians or the Egyptians or the Babylonians or one of the superpowers of the ancient world. But instead he chooses a little country, a little country that in Australia wouldn't amount to anything, you know. Far smaller than Tasmania. Far smaller. But that's what he chooses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. His name will be glorified. He'll get the credit, not us. To him be the glory. Amen. Nonetheless, here we are at this time in history. We have to understand that. God has placed you and I here at this time in history for a reason. It is a calling that is beyond any potential we have in and of ourselves. Yet, here we are. I read the heroes of the church, you know, I go back and I read about William Tyndale, he's one of my favorite, and I read about John Wesley, another one of my favorite, and John Bunyan, and another one of my favorite. Why didn't God put those guys here now? Why did he put me here? Why did he put us? Well, when I meet the Lord, I'm going to ask him. I'm sure he has his reasons, but I don't know what it is. Nonetheless, here we are tonight. Here we are tonight. It is June. June. You'd think there'd be a lot of things to commemorate about June. D-Day. Beginning of summer in the northern hemisphere, the beginning of winter for you guys down here in the southern hemisphere. You'd think there'd be a lot of things that people could commemorate, celebrate about June. Somebody in Sydney the other night showed me the new seal of the Anglican Church of Australia. It was the rainbow flag. With an Anglican emblem on the rainbow in it, like this. They call it Gay Pride Month. stores, chains of department stores, putting up posters and placards and boasting, sanctioning something like this. In the United States, there are 4 and 5, as young as 4 and 5-year-old children, having transvestites reading stories to them dressed in female drag, indoctrinating children to discover their identity. Don't you want to be like me? That's what you're saying to a little kid. Some Christian parents in Virginia objected to this kind of curriculum. The Gestapo, formerly known as the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Intimidation, put Christian parents on a terrorist watch list. In Canada, the Mounties, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, have been turned into a political police force. Some of the news clips I watched from Australia and Victoria with that guy David Andrews, Daniel Daniels, what a terrible, we're doing the same.
Terrible.
Jesus said you'll be despised by all nations for my name's sake, and this is going to be one of them.